It is the 25th day. Let me try this again. It's the 25th day of November 2024. There's so much goes into the shows that when it finally starts, I'm like totally lost because you know the routine. Grossy. Sadistic demon Grossy's at it again, I notice. Raphael Grossi. For hobbies, he goes around sniffing bicycle seats. So what you see him is he's in a picture with at Conference of Parties 29 in Baku. And so that's all. That just ended. Yesterday, was it? No, the 22nd, I think it was. And here is the story today with Baku signing a deal for nuclear. We see this so many times. Calling him evil is just being polite. You're just being a good person by doing that. You're just being a good person by doing that. Canada, which is the mayor of Toronto, the mayor of Toronto, or he's Toronto's a couple of million people, right? And so they're talking about small modular reactors. It's a real theme today, I notice, small modular reactors. We're making record investments to expand our energy grid. We're leading the future. We're one of the leaders in nuclear energy. Like, what are you talking about? Really, what is he talking about? Canada's reactors bankrupted multiple companies, including government companies, and they poison all of Canada since the CANDU reactors, they can't contain the tritium, let alone anything else. They're not building any reactors, so how are you leading one of the leaders in nuclear energy? This was a theme that showed up a few days ago, and we're seeing it over and over and over. There's been $100 million orders from Poland and other countries asking for small modular reactors that don't exist. There's no license into the applications into the regulatory agencies. You know, you got to build one at one of the national laboratories, get the kinks out of it for a decade, re-engineer it, rebuild it, find it, make sure it works, and then apply to mass produce it. Geothermal and renewables are whooping the nuclear industry on a scale that is, they don't talk about those numbers. It was this year, just solar power will be 660 gigawatts. A gigawatt is enough to power 1 million homes and businesses. The total combined combined gas, oil, and coal capacity worldwide is 4,800 gigawatts. And just solar alone this year in a 12-month period, they're estimated it's going to be 660 gigawatts, and with a 40% increase year after year. Nuclear's gone backwards. There's nothing fresh came on the grid. They couldn't make up for the ones that they lost, in other words, right? There is no nuclear renaissance. But it's this propaganda. They're just trying to create, again, it's more about, because we see this scam over and over and over, and there was a big scam recently with the small modular reactors, and Google, Amazon, Facebook, and a few other major anti-human medias said they were going to buy in the small modular reactors and for the power for their artificial intelligence. And the regulatory agency said, no, you're not. And so all these people lost their investments. But we've been seeing this scam 2 or 3 times a week for 13 years post-Fukushima. It's really something. They just keep coming up with new ways to get people to invest, and then 2 weeks later they lose their lives' savings to the small modular reactor scam. And we got a poll tonight helping. Another facet of that story Is United Nations claim small modular reactors are climate liberator a evil deception to promote disease factors? All nuclear power plants are splitting atoms into the environment. And there's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it, so it's a disease factory. And the price in Ontario is so crazy. $1.5 million for the average two-bedroom home. These are not very nice homes either. It's absurd. That's what nuclear industry does. It just destroys everything. Last night I was trying to remember a word, transcending, to describe James Lucid's music, anti-nuclear music. I don't want to label it anything outside of transcending. It's just transcended activism. He's taken it to a completely different plateau than anybody else has been able to do. And just because he doesn't get the views currently, it's the equivalent. He's got about 170 songs on his site right now on YouTube there. You'll see links in my description. And he's in the comment section. You go over. You should download. He's got new software over the last little while that is incredible. And now he's getting the kinks out of it. But every song he gets incredibly better at it. It's equivalent to writing 107 poems, basically, poetry, and putting it to music. It's fascinating, really, right? That because it takes some serious willpower to do something like that. Like, you can't write that stuff. You can't come up with that stuff without a lot of struggle over many years to rationalize what's really going on, and then understanding it so finite that you can put it to music. That's quite the weapon, right? There really isn't any better weapon than music. And what he's been able to do is really extraordinary. It's really extraordinary. And the industry considers him a threat at this stage, I would imagine. If they don't, they'll be... Well, it simply doesn't work that way. They know what's going down. And that must terrify the living daylights out of them. So you should support him, because he's putting himself in great risk to do what he's doing. And he's doing it for the benefit of everything and everybody by doing that. International Atomic Energy Agency to host a Ministerial Conference on nuclear science technology roles in addressing global challenges. They got so much resources, they just make up all this stuff. And let me come into the big screen, actually. Upcoming, and this is starting tomorrow, I think. They're not going to do it in Fukushima nuclear wasteland because they don't want to get sick eating the food there. So yeah, it's going to start tomorrow and go till the 28th. On nuclear science, nuclear technologies, nuclear applications, and nuclear technical cooperation programs at the International Atomic Energy Agency's headquarters in Vienna, Austria. This building is an amazing building. They got so much money put in that. I like to see their power bill every month. I'm pretty sure it'd be stunning. It's one of the most resource-intensive buildings you've ever seen. Are addressing global challenges, including shame on the International Atomic Energy Agency for even mentioning the word climate change. A growing cancer burden. Really, post-Fukushima, who would expect that? Rising hunger. All nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms, by the way. And all the nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools. That's tall, skinny stacks. Including mitigating and adapting to climate change. Nuclear is the Achilles heel of climate change. Is the reason that we have climate change. 80 years of emissions, and the emissions, think of invisible snowstorms for 70 years covering the entire planet. Every day there's more snowstorms covering the planet. You can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or perceive it. And every one of those snowflakes it looks like a snow. Think of a snowflake to visualize what is really going on, like a snowstorm covering the entire planet of radiation. Snow never melts, snow never goes away. Call it now, visualize it as anthropogenic radiation instead of a snowflake, an atom, a physical atom. It's pulsing energy in every direction, almost at the speed of light every second. Then you're starting to be honest with what's really going on. Now you're on the right path. For decades, the degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency has led the way in helping countries harness the great potential of nuclear science. We'll challenge that, said International Atomic Energy Agency current Director General Rafael Grossi, the notorious bicycle seat sniffer when he was in college. Monitoring plastic pollutions in the ocean. What does the International Atomic Energy Agency and plastic have to do with each other? Nothing, right? There's many organizations talking about plastic. But the reason they've invoked the word plastic is because nuclear is the actual issue, radioactive fallout. So, for instance, this model up there is plutonium-239 dispersal based on that model is 20 days up there, radioactive fallout, but it's based on a flawed number. It's nowhere near the actual amounts, which were estimated up to 250,000 pounds of plutonium was lost from the 36 meltdowns. There was 36 reactor cores in those 4 buildings. There was 8 at the top of each building. So 32 reactors and 4 reactor cores that melted down. It's 36 reactors. We went out and done research expeditions because Fukushima really did happen. We had endless headlines about die-off. We went out to see if we can contribute to the documentation. And I'd done 6 years going from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And the arrows are just representations of repeated research expeditions for 6 years. Done the same thing over and over and over for 6 years. The reason we've done it over and over for 6 years, because pre-Fukushima 2011, that's what the coastline looked like to your left. Post-Fukushima, this is what it looked like. And tidal zones are very, very vulnerable to pollution, but particularly anthropogenic man-made pollution, because you're talking about a tropical rainforest in British Columbia with 29,000 islands, but it's a tropical rainforest. And the rain washes down to the tidal zones, to the coastlines from the mountains that don't get hung up somewhere else. And so when we went up there, the species to your left are actually missing. And that's because of nuclear, because the International Atomic Energy Agency is the furthest thing from what they claim they are. They're hiding that from you and then telling you that nuclear is the savior when nuclear caused an extinction event that is now, and predictably so, consuming the entire planet. See, when you look at these models that they put out, original models based on 20 days of radiation, 20 to 30 typical models, all the models showed the entire planet covered in radioactive fallout in different isotopes from different countries, different institutions. And so then, by proxy now, you would expect the species symmetrically worldwide. If you're going to have that effect in British Columbia, it's going to be the same effect in all oceans, because the plume covers the entire biosphere, the entire oceans, all the fresh water. Rays and this really infuriated me today when I read this. Rays of hope. Get that? Rays, gamma rays, neutron rays, beta rays, X-rays. Man, and then they call it rays of hope when clearly this has nothing to do with hope. Once you go to your hospital and you get irradiated, you're on a countdown timer. If you don't die at the hospital, you're on a countdown timer because this stuff has devastated your health. I forgot to put this one in there. 3% efficiency of chemotherapy treatment on cancer cures. And this was true, too, for radiation chemotherapy. Conclusion based on facts. The overall contribution of curative and adjuvant cryotoxic chemotherapy to 5-year survival in adults was estimated to be 2.3% survival rate in Australia and 2.1% in the United States. So why would you continue to use that? And it's always married up with radiation, right? It's never just going to be chemotherapy, which is just insidious. And there's tons of chemotherapy pills. You can get the pills with radiation in them. So when you go near the bottles with the Geiger counter, my Geiger counter just recently for when live was over 300 counts per minute. Was there another big release in Japan or something? Cancer cure for all. Let me just take you down that insane road. Remember, this is from the International Atomic Energy Agency story, aimed at expanding cancer cure in middle and low-income countries where the need is the greatest. That's where they ship most of the Fukushima radioactive food besides Canada, was low-income countries, and particularly native communities. Rays of hope, cancer cure for all. That is the most sadistic, twisted, monstrous statement conceivable. Let me introduce you to what happens with radiation therapy. Radiation injury is a silent epidemic. That's an understatement, by the way. And what year was that? 1993. It's infinitely worse now. Radiation-induced injuries to your eyeballs from radiation therapy. Radiation injuries to your heart. Radiation-induced rectal injuries. You go and get radiation tumor in your shoulder, and now you have rectal injuries. You have spinal cord injuries from radiation therapy. You have heart injuries from radiation therapy. You have bowel injuries from radiation therapy. You have central nervous systems from radiation therapy. Radiation lung injury from radiation therapy. Gland injuries, severe injuries, acute injury of your glands from radiation therapy. Radiation-induced liver disease from radiation therapy. Bile duct injuries from radiation therapy. Radiation-induced brain injury is so prevalent. I got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different studies on that alone. Language decline after brain radiation therapy. Look at all the people in these studies making a fortune on studying their human lab rats. Radiation-induced brain injuries. And how many call for to stop it? Because if all these people call for stopping it, then they won't be able to make all the money they're making studying the human lab rats, which is you and your loved ones and your children and your friends and your families. Cognitive impairment in young patients treated with radiation therapy for a brain tumor. Cognitive impairment, I guess so. You're destroying every cell in their body. Aging masses detection of radiation-induced brain injuries. Late radiation rectal injury, oh joy. And some of these injuries don't show up for a decade. Like your femur might break off a decade later. Or your growth plate might break off 5 years later. Radiation injuries to the growth plate. Radiation therapy induced cardiac injuries, radiation injury to the central nervous tissues, radiation injury to your eyeballs. Yay. Radiation injury to the lower digestive tract. We got one more. Radiation injury in the human kidney. We got I got like, must be 1,400 of these. And I remember being depressed. It was on a Saturday morning or something. I had got an epiphany to start collecting that kind of studies. I was collecting it on Sellafield and child cancers clusters around the Sellafield nuclear disease factory in the United Kingdom. And I started realizing there was all these studies I was glancing over, but because I got a tendency just to focus in on what I'm trying to put together a thought in my head. I'm looking for the evidence to back it up. Radiation injuries in the human kidneys. And so I put in radiation injuries in the United Kingdom for the UK. Then I put in another page, open up radiation injuries for Great Britain. And I was overwhelmed with studies of radiation injury and radiation therapy, from radiation therapy. So the question was, how do you call that radiation therapy when all it does is destroy everything in your body and your loved one's body? How do you quantify calling that? And there's no way that Raphael Grossi at International Atomic Energy Agency members don't know the stuff I'm showing you. There's no way they don't know this stuff. There's zero possibility from my research expeditions and everything else. And what drives me nuts is I'm unique in that I'm the only person to go out and do this stuff and do public educational programs on it. And that frightens me. That frightens me beyond any concept. Because if I can do it, anybody can do it. That's clear. I'm really not that smart. I'm just very thoughtful, and I find the evidence to back up my assertions. And if I got the evidence, then I'll come out and talk about it. But I don't talk about things I don't know nothing about. What's the point? I've been doing it for 22 years. 23 years. Coming up. And it's quite the struggle to do the things I'm doing, to keep the motivation going, to keep the operation going. So many little things that eat away at my ability to keep going. So everything's got to be dedicated. I have to dedicate everything to this operation. I have nothing in my life outside of, like, I don't buy anything unless it's for the operation, in other words. Atoms for Food. This is International Atomic Energy Agency, a joint initiative with the Food and Agricultural Organizations. There's 200 countries, military-industrial complex, 200 militaries in the United Nations, right? And they're just a company. They don't have any sovereignty over any country. They can't imprison somebody for breaking any of their rules and regulations. They're not a that's their own words. They're not what's the word for it? Let's keep going here. Atoms for Food Initiative. So, like, this is such an interesting statement, Atoms for Food, because every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. And they know that food and plants and tomato plants and trees and fruit plants and fruit trees and vegetables and everything, berries and mushrooms, whatever, sucks up radiation right away. It just sucks it right up through the root system, and it ends up in the top parts of the plants where the plants are growing, right? And this is why you're not seeing spiders tying on the plants anymore worldwide, particularly here in Canada. We noticed this phenomenon. There used to be 500,000 spiders per acre, 480,000 or something per acre. It's pretty crazy, right? And imagine how many insects it takes to keep them going per acre. And I would check the spider webs for see what species were in that part of the the area that I'm in, because that's the best way to do it. Check a spider web and you can see all the carcasses, right? And you can't find them, but you'll find them tied onto rocks, spider webs. They're always deformed. You'll find them tied onto houses, man-made structures, all summer long. But you won't find them. And if you look at the webs, there's very little in the web, and the webs are always deformed, and not from struggling insects or something, but deformed by the spider. And the spiders, the way they make their webs is really special. You should look up the video of it sometime. It's very special how they do it. And they will also eat their webs and take it somewhere else. And the webs are bioaccumulating radioactive fallout. And we know from studies that spiders bioaccumulate radiation 1,000% more than the background, because they're liquefying their meals, which are bioaccumulating radiation. So they're bioaccumulating radiation. And this is why they disappeared. And not only that, but the plants, the radiation at the top of the plants is pulsing energy almost at the speed of the light. And the spiders, they can actually perceive that, where humans can't. We can, but we just don't recognize it, I think, is what's really going on. Because the human senses are very interesting. So why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms, and they're saying atoms for food? The last thing you want is anthropogenic man-made atoms around your food, trust me. Because it gets all the stuff. I mean, they got millions of these studies in every country. 134 cesium in potatoes. And then every time you look at a nuclear power plant, when you look in the distance, all you see is farms. Because the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation. How much are they censoring me tonight, I wonder? How bad are they sticking the boost to me? 12 viewers. Bless your hearts. I'm not being censored at all. I've been doing this particular show for over a decade. And all I can drag into my show is 12 people. Because my show is pretty shitty, right? Is UN's claim small modular reactors are climate liberators an evil deception to promote disease factories? And so sometimes I'll slash words and put a number there, for instance, or won't put the abbreviation on factories or the S on liberators, because I can only put in 100 characters. So I'll put in my sentence, then I'll say, okay, well, I'm 8 over my 100, so I got to chip away and get rid of numbers to try to get convey the same message I'm trying to convey. But that's why I'm censored, because we're talking about the International Atomic Energy Agency and the degenerate UN, the traitorous, murderous UN. Atoms for food is the most absurd. It's the most absurd thing imaginable, because they know what they're doing. They know every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms, and they know if you're in a satellite and you look down, this is what you're going to see. And by the way, that's Sellafield, England. That's one of the most biggest polluters in England. And this is a satellite picture around it, nothing but farms and the ocean. Do you think it's an accident? Do you really think they're not trying to murder you? And that they know the food is sucking up that radiation. So why would you build all your nuclear plants and nuclear dumps and nuclear reprocessing facilities, disease factories, we should say, surrounded by prime farmland? Why would you do that, if not for nefarious reasons? And then to come out and suggest that atoms for food is a solution, when the atoms in your food is the problem. The anthropogenic man-made atoms in your food is the problem, and they got endless studies that acknowledges that. The atoms for food is a genocide machine. Is to lull you into complacency, thinking that nuclear has even a smidgen of redeeming qualities. Atoms for food. Here's how bad Japan's atoms for food is. They're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation, surrounded by a nuclear wasteland of 14 prefectures. And the food was banned by 55 countries in those 14 prefectures for over a decade. Not Canada, but countries, real countries. And everybody's fighting over nonsense and nobody's paying attention. I have 11 viewers on my show. Not that that's going to stop me. And then, is it any surprise when you see that there was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year? Because they didn't stop growing food in the nuclear wasteland. They went so far as to grow it growing food and harvesting it right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. That's a fraction of the 30 million 1-ton bags of radiation that they picked up. Canada removed all restrictions after 93 days. And everybody in Canada has an autoimmune issue because they've been eating that food. There's heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's. Have you seen Alzheimer's spiking where you too? Huh? Have you? Dementia? Have you seen that go nuts where you too? Ask your local hairdressers how's Alzheimer's, dementia, and autism, and Down syndrome spiking in the last decade. They say, yeah, it's crazy. Guess what? Atoms for fools is what it should be. Will seek to inform the policymakers and decision makers. It'll inform policymakers and decision makers. This is what I do. I inform them that they're the law, and here's the facts. I'm showing it to you. On the potential way forward for nuclear disease factories as the reliable backbone of clean, green, and too cheap to meter. First off, every nuclear power plant needs 2 gas, oil, and coal plants dedicated to it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Atoms for Net Zero refuses to acknowledge the biggest pollution, which is the big ships. One massive container ship equals 50 million cars. Because they're burning fuel that was left over from petro refinements that was supposed to be kept for thousands of years. And instead they put it in these big ships and burn it. It's completely inefficient. Atom for Net Zero refuses to acknowledge that 15 of the biggest ships, and there's 90,000 of these ships on the ocean at any given time, create more pollution than all the cars on the planet. More pollution than the 760 million cars on the planet one ship does, or 15 of these ships do. No, they want to blame you, your tin cans, your pop bottles, your cardboard. The processing of nuclear, just the uranium-308 from the ground. So once they get it out of the mine, it goes through a stockpile, the crushers, the ball mill, the water gets added to it, there's thickeners, there's acid, there's leaching tanks, there's thickener and sand filters, solvent extractions, precipitation tanks, waste to the tailing dams, which are all that waste, the chemicals that they're using is vented, by the way, into the environment. Thickeners, centrifuges, dryers, and then to the market, which is the reactors. Once it gets in the reactors for 4 months, you take it out. Now it's going to be split in atoms in the fuel pool for the rest of humanity. Those atoms, like when you take the fuel out of a reactor core, is powering 1 million homes and businesses in the containment, right? Once you open it up, you're releasing all kinds of radiation directly into the environment. That's why they bring in 1,000+ temporary workers to do maintenance, because they're not going to show up in the statistics for the insurance healthcare. But once you take the fuel out after 14 months and put it in the pools at the site, where it's going to stay for who knows how many decades, it's splitting the same atoms it would for 1 million homes and businesses that it would power. How many atoms do you got to produce to boil a glass of water? The numbers, you're talking about like Google numbers. You're talking about extraordinary numbers. So how many you got to do, how many atoms you got to produce to boil water for 1 million homes and businesses every day, every minute. When you take it out and put it in a fuel pool, it's still splitting those atoms. Those atoms have no containment. They're released directly into the environment. And that's why they're always surrounded by farms as far as you can see. Because a huge amount is going to fall in a direct environment. You can ignore everything I'm telling you, but that's all you're doing. You're ignoring it. You're no longer being honest. You no longer have it into the equations. You're no longer a participant. You're just another useful idiot. They're going out in the ocean for 30 years and dumping it into the ocean. They can't bring it back to port. They got to get it off the ship in a certain amount of hours. So they're doing it on the continental shelves. And when you get this close to a ship and your Geiger counter is screaming at you, you're talking about absurd radiation. So the crews on these ships are getting severe illnesses and diseases and passing it on genetically to their loved ones. Atoms for net zero. When these barrels get down into the ocean, every 33 feet there's an atmosphere. So you're looking at around 14.8 pounds per square inch. So by the time it gets down to 3 or 4 atmospheres, the drum will crush. And the drums, they have, they're crimped. The tops and bottoms of the drums are crimped on. It's not a solid drum, right? They're actually crimped on. So once you get down a few atmospheres where you're getting 30, 45 pounds per square inch on these drums, they will collapse. And I spent 14,000 hours under the ocean. I've never seen a drum that wasn't collapsed. Atoms for net zero. The atoms for net zero is the smoke. And by the way, net zero is a paper by Miles Allen. Just let me touch on that for a second, actually. Because we haven't covered that lately, have we? We're not even through 2 stories yet. How bad is it? This is normal. That's the saddest thing about this statement. This is normal. United Kingdom is building 2 reactors, right? They're both of them going to be surrounded by farms. What's the odds, I wonder? So the father of global warming was Brock. Someone Brocker. I got to find that other piece there. The father of net zero was Miles Allen. He's the physicist behind net zero. They got a nice cushy job at Cambridge now as an adjunct professor. The United Nations takes these studies, like that one, the hockey stick, the carbon footprint. A brief and frustrating history of the carbon footprint was a public relation campaign by BP Oil after they killed millions of migratory seabirds with a shipwreck of oil, right? And then they blamed it on you. And of course, the father of global warming, James Hansen, one of the most despicable humans in history, in a 15-minute speech he gave to Congress in 1988, is best known for his research in climatology, which promotes nuclear, by the way, right? He said NASA was 99% confident the warming was caused by accumulation of greenhouse gases. 99% confident. Well, greenhouse gas is the so-called carbon. It doesn't travel to the upper troposphere and atmospheres at all. It doesn't travel very far. It's very heavy. The only thing that does that is anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. And of course, Hansen, with NASA, of all people, why would you want to trust NASA, who faked the moon landing? His testimony was an important turning point in the history of global climate change. It was just a 15-minute sitting in front of Congress, and then that was weaponized against humanity, particularly by League of Nations, now known as United Nations. They changed their name after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His testimony was pivotal and marked the official beginning of the global warming policy debate, which is, so you got the James Hansen, you got BP Oil, you got Miles Allen, and Brock. I can't remember his name for the life of me. My apologies. If there's a piece missing in that, I'm not going to go look for it right now, but that's the three people. No, there it is right there, actually. Wallace Brocker. Wallace Brocker. Hang on here, we get back in business here. So Japan, Atoms for Food doesn't go down there and promote Atoms for Food. Where 14 prefectures, the food was banned from a decade because of anthropogenic man-made fallout. Air travel industry emissions fall outside the scope of Conference of Parties 26 agreement and 29 agreement, by the way, because they can't travel anywhere to tell their lies without flying, right? So they're not going to include that. So James Hansen, by the way, ignored a whole lot of information in order to put out his propaganda. So if you, like, when it comes to uranium, we're not talking about the nuclear plant itself here. We're just talking about the uranium. Like, it goes through this whole processing, and then there's an absurd amount of waste left over where they just dump it in the ground. And they've done this for 80 years. They're still doing it today. They've changed rules and regulations everywhere to accommodate, to make it legal for them to do it. So retroactively, if down the road you find it and discover it, you can't hold them accountable. Atoms for net zero. Really, you're going to think that's net zero? You think really Atoms for net zero doesn't acknowledge any of this? Once it gets down to the ocean floor, it crumbles, and it releases radiation. For Atoms for net zero doesn't include the fact that you got community after community after community in Japan alone where you abandon your universities, your schools, your hospitals, your patients. You abandon your museums, your graveyards. You abandon the graveyards. You picked up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation, for goodness sakes. Just 3% of that prefecture where you want to trick people into going back. And you came out with all kinds of terrorists, real terrorists. And currently, the Japan government is running an operation against me. The Japanese government, the government of Japan, is running an operation against me. It's called Operation Long Jump. Long Jump. And it's to discredit me, right? So they've attacked everything in the province where I live, and everybody that sees me now thinks I'm some kind of monster, right? Operation Long Jump. Very effective what they done to me. But the thing they didn't count on is that I'm not like your typical victim. I'm not going away. You're not able to drive me away. It doesn't work on me. And you got these terrorists. This is a shoe bomber, and that's his twin brother over there, Stinkfoot. And they brought him in. Remember, they called into the show. We got all kinds of actual documentation where he called into the show bragging about Operation Long Jumps. Oh, you're going to get it now, Dana. You really think I didn't know that you were going to do that to me? Because that's what cowards do. You really think I didn't anticipate all of this when I went public years ago? But the reason I went public is because I realized somebody had to be out there. They had to be honest and approachable, and they had to be human. So you had to put out your name. Sure, I knew they were going to destroy me and my life, but it's worth it to try to protect this planet and the 8 million species, right? To me, it's worth it. I know what cowards does. I'm not stupid. I'm not naive. I'm not gullible. I'm not going to waste my time on the average Joe Blow around here or anywhere else. There's people like me out there, and a lot of them are watching me, all 14 of them. And I educate the policymakers and the investors, the decision makers. And that is why nuclear is trying its best to survive another few years. Because the industry is so evil, it's normal. Being evil is normal. That's who they are. They don't get the job unless they're evil. It's normal. They can't actually get a position unless they're evil. That's simply how it works. And by the way, who am I? I'm Dana. I'm your friendly neighborhood nuclear victim like you. You can call into these live shows. We're in Canada at 709-589-4406. 4406. Atoms for net zero. I got a poll actually here tonight. Is United Nations claim the small modular reactors are climate liberators, an evil deception to promote the disease factories? And if you don't consider 30 million one-ton bags a disease factory, if you don't consider abandoning your communities a disease factory, then what's wrong with you? If you don't wake up and smell the coffee and ask the question of why is every nuclear plant they got and the ones they're building going to be surrounded by farms? Why did they close 14 prefectures, ban the food in 14 prefectures by 55 countries for a decade because it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine? Why did they take it out and dump it into our oceans for 30 years on the continental shelf, the actual nursery of the planet? UN warns Russia strikes risk Ukraine's nuclear crisis. Independent United Nations human rights experts. They're not paid by UN. They're not part of UN. They're independent. Like I am. I'm independent. They're independent. But yet they're UN human rights experts. Independent. You can't be an independent human rights expert and not be part of UN and get any prominence in the media, right? They're simply never going to do that. Only the controlled opposition is allowed in the media. No real people are allowed there. Many in Fukushima were exposed to radiation above the permitted levels. The survey did not look at internal exposures. Well, why wouldn't you look at internal exposure? Like really, when you pick up 30 million one-ton bags, you abandon your communities and you only look at external exposures. UN human rights experts have warned an escalating risk of a nuclear disaster in Ukraine following Russia's continued attack on the country's electrical infrastructures. So the nuclear power plant is completely dependent upon external power. It's maintained critical safety system through the power grid. Ukraine's nuclear facilities, like every nuclear plant on the planet, relies on a stable power grid to maintain the entire system. Not the critical safety systems, but everything. It can't run on its own power. So it has two dedicated gas, oil, and coal plants dedicated to the nuclear city, the nuclear sites. These are huge resource-intensive sites. Each reactor needs to pump 4,500 tons a minute of water. Think of 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks passing you in 1 minute. How fast would you have to go? If you had a one-ton pickup truck, that's what it takes, 1 ton of water. 2,200 pounds, 1,000 liters of water. So for that to pass you in 1 minute, you would need 4,500 tons, 4,500 1-ton pickup trucks have to pass you in 1 minute. Can you visualize 4,500 1-ton pickup trucks passing you in a minute? How much energy does it take to do that every minute? 1,440 minutes a day. Now, it's not just one nuclear power plant reactor, on a site. There's multiple reactors. So say there's 4 reactors. Like you're talking about 17,600 1-ton pickup trucks passing you in 1 minute. So you're stood on the side of the road. There's 17,600 1-ton pickup trucks are going to drive past you one beyond the other in 1 minute, or four rows deep in 1 minute. Or a million balloons with a gallon of water in each balloon. You have to go into that reactor every minute. So how do you coordinate a million balloons? They got a gallon of water in each one and get it into a reactor every minute. So if you stood up right here, you got to have a million 1-gallon balloons got to pass you every minute for each reactor. And typically there's 4, 5, 6, 7 reactors on a site. How much water, how much energy does it take? It takes 2 dedicated gas, oil, and coal plants. Now, that's just one facet of the site. That's just one facet of the nuclear chain. There's a million corporations that build material, equipment, nuts and bolts, you name it, for a nuclear site. Everything is triply inspected on a nuclear site before it even gets built. And lots of it is rejected. Only the best of the best of the best, the greatest, only the most precious of precious metals is allowed on the site. And everything is bombarded with neutrons for its entire history and is no longer usable after that because it's radioactive forever. And so to call it carbon-free or any kind of connotations like that whatsoever, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has documented extensive civilian harm. Well, what about Fukushima? You didn't document that, did you? Tokyo, 36 million people, metropolitan Tokyo, should no longer be inhabited. And everyone is a victim of Fukushima. The people are truly suffering, bleeding under the skin, urinary hemorrhaging. Child's blood test started changing last year. There's 13,646 children out of 38,000 children with thyroid tumors in 2012. Thyroid tumors. Which means they're producing radioactive hormones for the rest of their life. And if you got tumors in your thyroids, you bloody well have saturated your skeleton with anthropogenic man-made isotopes, which means you're not just producing radioactive hormones for as they're developing years in the rest of their life, but they're also producing radioactive stem cells. I know how fucking boring this stuff is. I apologize for it. There's nothing I can do about it. That's the story. That's the curse of nuclear, the nuclear plague. The nuclear plague is real, right? Scientists used to call it a plague. And doctors used to call it a biological weapon because its acute effects upon the body. So whether you're an insect or a bird or an animal or a mammal or a human or a whale or a tree or whatever, well, for species anyway, when the radiation it gets in your body, and we're talking about something, you can put 2 million atoms in the head of a needle, but you can't see it. But a single one gets in your body attacks it viciously for the rest of your life with white blood cells because it doesn't know what it is. And because it explodes every second, almost at the speed of light, whether it's gammas, alphas, neutrons, or betas. It explodes at the speed of light every second, just shy of the speed of light. And it destroys cells and chromosomes and DNA and permanent lesions to your organs. Your body tries to repair that every second. And it's exploding in every direction, almost at the speed of light every second. And so your body attacks, tries to repair everything. You can't keep up with that every second. So it's in overdrive for the rest of your life, trying to repair all the damage, which you can't. And now you're talking about all these mutated cells and chromosomes and DNA in your body. And then it attacks the source too, right? Eventually over a decade or 10 years or 20 years, it'll build a sarcophagus around the source, the anthropogenic man-made atom, which is a foreign invasion. It's not created by the solar system, so your body doesn't recognize it. Just because the industry screwed you over and added it to the periodic tables, it's not from the solar system. It's not the true periodic table, right? They done that to confuse you, and then they conflated it with natural anthropogenic. They conflated anthropogenic with natural stuff to further confuse you, make it incapable for you to rationalize or to be able to understand the enormity of the problem. No, to intimidation, arbitrary detention, and forced disappearance and torture. Does anybody really believe censoring me is not some kind of torture? Does anybody really think what they're doing to anybody that speaks out is intimidation? You think calling me up, Operation Long Jump, is not intimidation? What they're doing to me? Think calling me up and reminding me over and over and over how good it is they're doing and how much trouble I'm in and how scared I should be? Of course it is. That's all they're good at. They're just good at being scumbags. In fact, they're the best at it. The mentally disabled are working at Fukushima. The homeless are treated like disposable people. That's what the nuclear industry does. So when you hear them looking for sympathy, UN saying independent experts, UN experts, not experts, but UN experts. UN is a military-industrial complex that is weaponized against humanity and the species, and it can't survive without exterminating all of us. The only way it can last, it can't survive a day without exterminating us. It warns that such a scenario could trigger a nuclear disaster potentially exceeding both the Fukushima and Chernobyl combination, really. You do realize Fukushima was 36 reactor cores melted down. 32 in the fuel pools, 32 reactor cores, and 4 fuel pools are gone, or 8 fuel pools are gone. There's most likely more on top of that. And the 4 reactor cores are gone, reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it went pretty hard cutting off the power to a single nuclear plant who have generators. They're not going to be hit by a tsunami. They're not going to be disabled. They're not going to have 600 to 1,200 miles of the coastline ripped off. It's going to be very difficult to, if you lose external power, they still have generators. Japan should never have built their reactors where they built them. They built them on a fault line where they have 1,000 earthquakes a year and a 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis up to 300 feet high. At some point, they knew that was going to go to shit, right? And they built it in the worst possible spot where it was guaranteed to happen at some point, and it did. And they didn't even try to put any defenses there. Soil from Fukushima radiation decontamination work to be reused in the new farmland. So the 30 million one-ton bags, they're cutting them open and growing food in it in the nuclear wasteland within sight of the ongoing nuclear meltdowns. But UN is like, look at us, look at us. And they turn their back on the reality and poison everybody on this planet for 80 years. You cannot go to a supermarket on this planet without eating radioactive food. Japan, in particular, had 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. Three 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. It's a nuclear wasteland, no matter how you look at it. Japan should be abandoned, clearly. They warned that such a scenario could trigger a nuclear disaster potentially exceeding both the Chernobyl and Fukushima. It's outrageous. It's outrageous that they used that to downplay it. And while the International Atomic Energy Agency, the most despicable of despicable people on the planet, agreed to expand its mission, I guess they did, right? There's a perpetual genocide going on, omnicide on this planet. They work on a voluntary basis, not UN staff, do not receive a salary for their work, and belong to no organization or government, really. Serving in a purely individual capacity. In other words, they're brown nosers. Like, they attacked me for free, looking for, it's called brown nosing to the nuclear industry, right? Well, you know I'm right. By the way, where am I? You know, in Canada lifted all restrictions on the food on June 14th, 2011, 93 days after Fukushima. Well, 55 countries banned the food there for over a decade. Now Canada, though. Canada removed all restrictions. NANO Nuclear Energy announced a $60 million private placement with 3 accredited institutional investors. NANO Nuclear, all their investors just ran away there a few weeks ago for the big scam they done the week before that, right? Oh, Google and Amazon and Facebook and Meta is all going to buy our electricity. Buy our shares now. So everybody bought their shares. The people at NANO and the nuclear industry sold their shares right away. A week later, the bottom gets pulled out from under it. Everybody's dumping their shares. And then the same people now from NANO and the nuclear industry comes in and buys up those shares that they sold, got them for dirt cheap, and they got a nice tidy $2 million profit each. And a week and a half later, here they are again, doing the same scam again. Rinse and repeat, right? I mean, if that's not despicable, what actually is? Like, the people they're stealing money for worked all their lives and were tricked into buying stocks that the stock sellers knew was going to crash. They've been doing it for every 2 or 3 weeks for 13 years. And by the way, their stocks flat line this morning, but here's the media out there pushing them everywhere because they got cheap stocks, right? That's how they're going to get paid. If the stocks go up, they can sell their stocks and get a big paycheck, see? That's how it works. NANO Nuclear Energy announces a $60 million private placement. How the hell could they do that? Unless it's a scam, see? They don't got no reactors. They don't got no application into the regulatory agency. Why would you give them $60 million for? They don't own any land. They have no intentions of building a reactor like NuScale. The same thing. They're doing the exact to the letter scam that NuScale done and continues to do. There's no difference. Cash position expected to be $120 million in just under 7 months as a public company. They don't have a product. They don't have a license, an application for the license for the reactor that doesn't exist into the regulatory agencies, and they're raking in gold. Living the high. It was a few years ago, probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago. One of the scumbags up in Washington with these small modular reactors was calling me up on a regular basis every couple of days. And he was telling me how he had 26 cars, 26 sports cars, like 1970 Barracudas and 1972 Challenger, all in perfect cherry mint shape. He had a beautiful acreage. He was telling me there was lots of insects out there. There was lots of species along the coastline. I played along with him for a couple of weeks. I just wanted to see how crazy somebody really was. It was really something. And the last conversation I had with him, he was trying to mock me, right? And the true colors came out. And I said, do you really think you're the only person that done this to me in the nuclear industry? Do you really think I'm that stupid? I said, I know you don't, because that's why you're calling me all the time, because you know I'm not stupid like you and your mom. And it was really something, how low these people will crawl just for their own satisfaction. Financing provides cash runway to expedite cutting-edge portable nuclear micro-reactor technologies. Trust the nose. They don't have a portable nuclear micro-reactor technology application or license or facility or piece of land they're going to build it on, or they're not acquiring the technology or the expertise or the people. They're selling stocks and buying stocks and selling stocks and buying stocks. They're ripping off investors. That's all they're doing. Rinse and repeat every 2 or 3 weeks. It's so predictable on top of that. If I was evil, I would just go and do what everybody else in that industry is doing, right? When the stocks crash next week, go buy them, wait for 2 weeks, and then cash in my stocks and make a fortune, right? Just do that every 2 or 3 weeks. You're going to make a fortune. That's how you make a fortune now. And they done it with a Canadian company about 3 years ago. I can't come up with a name off the top of my head, from Toronto. Had bought the physical uranium-308. And so that forced miners to start going back to work and producing, and so now they told the investors, hey, look, the miners are all going back to work. There's a nuclear renaissance. You should buy these stocks. And so the mom and pop who worked all their life in factories and that bought these stocks. And then 2 weeks later, they lost their life savings. And they do it every 2 or 3 weeks to the victims. A leading advanced nuclear energy and technology company. You're not a leading advanced nuclear energy. You don't even have a design. NANO Nuclear does not have a design. Not only do they not have a design, they don't have the engineers to produce the design. They're not trying to produce the design, which is like 1 million pieces of paper. You have to submit that to the regulatory agencies. They're going to hire 300 or 400 people. It's going to take them 3, 4, 5 years to get through that. They're going to find all kinds of flaws. They're going to submit it back to NANO Nuclear. NANO Nuclear is going to revise their engineering schematics. They're going to resubmit them back to the regulatory agencies, where hundreds of people are going to go through that looking for any more flaws. And then when they finally pass all of these rigorous so-called checks and balances, they have to build a prototype and run it hard for many years. But to build these things, typically a decade or more. And you got to run it you can't just work on something for a decade and run it for 1 year and say, here you go. You got to run it hard for several years to get the flaws out of through many cycles, fuel cycles, to see if there's any adverse, and only the best of the best material can be used. It's never going to come to fruition. Look, the media that is coming out and telling you these stories are the same media that pretended they were on top of Fukushima Reactor 4, 150 feet above the stump of the building to your left. There's ABC Cecilia Vega from Australia is now a press secretary at the White House for CBS, who Seth Dorn happens to work for, which is a senator's son, pretending he's on top of it. Rupert Winfield Hayes not only pretended he was on top of Reactor 4 at Fukushima, he done the same thing for Reactor 3. And CNN goes what I was saying. They're scumbags. But nobody's challenged these people. What's up with that? There's no universities came out and challenged these narratives, these assertions. calling it clean, green, and too cheap to meter, and just using other words, portable and clean energy. You don't have it. It doesn't exist. You've been at it for 80 years. You still haven't created. What makes you think this company, who hasn't even got an application into a regulatory agency, is somehow on the stock market selling multiple shares? From the financial significantly augments the NATO nuclear cash. That's all it does. They're going to siphon the shit out of that, aren't they? Just like the Nuclear Waste Management Organization with $26 billion 22 years ago, only got $26 billion today. Never grew no interest in 22 years and $26 billion. That's pretty interesting. With this cash on hand, NANO Nuclear will be able to more readily advance its cutting-edge microreactors. Like, what are you talking about? Really, what are they talking about? The journalists that are promoting that are crazy. Sorry. Oh, that's what we're looking for. Give us a clickety-click. Click some bells. Give us a subscribe. Stop being so cheap. E equals MC stupid. So most people, they like, well, I don't know nothing about nuclear. It's too complicated for me. No, but it's not. See, that's the problem. It's not too complicated. In the old days, we used to get rid of our problems. Remember those days? We got rid of our problems. They weren't a problem no more. That's nuclear. That's what should be happening to nuclear. You got to get rid of your problem. It's going to get rid of you if you don't. The company will issue an aggregate of 2.5 million shares of common stocks, 5-year warrants, which are $2 more expensive, to purchase an aggregate of up to an additional 2.5 million shares of common stocks. Investors will pay a purchase price of $24 for each share. But why would you invest in a company that at best is 30 to 40 years away from having a product? Why would you do that? Are you like 20 years old and you don't drive a car? You're not going to go skiing or taking any chances for the rest of your life. And you're going to get a payout in 40 years. Do you think mom and pop who worked all their life is investing in this company because they think they're going to have to wait 40 years to get kickback from their investments? Or did they believe that they're going to get money back next year and the year after? It's going to be great money, right? That's what's going on. The stock sellers, the lawyers and everybody else that are selling these stocks, are pushing an investment that is it's a wolf's ticket, right? And the journalists who put out the stories, they're making bank. One big happy scumbag family. That's what this is. The universities, the journalists, the medias, the nuclear industry, the International Atomic Energy all work to help each other synergistically to destroy everything and everybody's future and get their paychecks. Nuclear Energy Agency at the Constipated Party 29 focus on nuclear financing and young generation. They love to go after the young generation, don't they? They'll make it seem cool. Everything is going to be cool. And Baku now just signed an agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency for nuclear power after having a conference of parties down there. The Nuclear Energy Agency delegation attended the 29th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties. It's a conference of parties, all right. It's not a conference of parties. It's one big parties. They got what they wanted. What they wanted was the carbon credits. They just, within 3 hours on day one, they passed that. No deliberations. No time for media to ask any questions. It was passed. The rest of it was the distraction. How many times have you heard of mention carbon credit since day one? You haven't, have you? But carbon credit is going to affect everything and everybody on the entire planet, and very expensive too. So they got what they wanted, and then the rest of it is distraction, right? All that was. Before anybody even got a chance to show up, they came out and announced, "We just passed carbon credit." Yoo-hoo! In discussions of nuclear energy role in addressing climate change. What are you talking about addressing climate change? How can you use nuclear to address, when nuclear is hemorrhaging radiation that's pulsing energy every second? All these atoms are pulsing energy every second, almost at the speed of light. Let me explain it to you. It's really special what they got away with for all these years. But we definitely got a handle on it now. We got it worked out. We got all, and what I mean by that is we have the documentation to back up our assertions. So think of that plume you see coming out of Fukushima, Japan, as a snowstorm. Now this snowstorm is going to last for 31 days, this particular snowstorm. But this is day 20 right here. Let me stop it right there for a second. So on day 20, which is the 1st of April. That's the 1st of April, right there. 4th month, the 1st day. So this is France's study of 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. You can't just have cesium-137, by the way. But it's 1 million to 10 million atoms, and each atom pulses energy 600 feet every second for 300 years. If it was only cesium-137, it would still be a catastrophic event because it pulses energy 600 feet every second, almost at the speed of light. It's an invisible snowstorm, but that snowstorm never stopped. And that's not going to go away for 300 plus years, but it's never stopped coming out. When it finally stops, then you can count down to 300 years. But until it actually stops coming out of there, but that same plume you're looking at, we have academic studies showing incredible different isotopes. We have studies from major institutions showing Krypton 85 plumes. We have plume models of Xenon 130. Plume models of Xenon 133. We have let me scroll down here because we have to reload everything over the last while. We have, let me show you a study from France, by the way. Because there's the plume model from France, but it's actually based upon a study showing 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. That's the French government, the IRSN itself. Cesium-137 levels increased 1 million to 10 million times after Fukushima. But the plume you're looking at there is based on 7 days, right? Which is the same one as this one. That is their model. That's the IRSN, France's government, right? You see at the top of the page? That's based on 31 days right there. So there's not a single bird, a single insect, a single human, or a single animal, not a single species on this planet is not infested with this anthropogenic man-made plague, this lethal plague. And there's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. Burnt out, eh? Long day. Long day. That's okay. That's good for you. I'm just not all the way back yet. So the 15 biggest ships on the planet create more pollution than all the cars in the world. There's 90,000 of those ships on the ocean at any given time. That's 4.3 trillion people or something at the animosity equivalent on the planet. When you scale it up to 90,000 of these ships, these container ships around the ocean. During Conference of Parties 28 last year, more than 20 countries issued a declaration to triple the nuclear energy by 2050. None of them has made a dent on that promise, by the way. Marking a historical moment for nuclear energy. A historical moment. Again, this complete fabrication. Just because a journalist is willing to come out and cook up these lies. Just remember who UN really is, right? They're everybody. They're everything. They have infiltrated every facet of everything in everybody's countries. Unclear, ERPA, the ICRP, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the National Council on Radiation Protection, Food and Agricultural Organization. They have, I don't know how many, it's around 500 subsidy. And they just pay off the journalists, and the journalists will tell whatever story, you name, whatever story that the International Atomic Energy Agency or their subsidy companies. And what they'll do is they'll all show up at the same meeting, and they'll all come to a consensus, but they're the same people. It's the same organization, all of it. And there's a video of Kathleen Higley doing a presentation, telling journalists what to write. Let me just drag up that video, because that's a really important video, because she likes to brag, same as Gillian Thomas from UK. They like to brag, and that's handy if you know. I'm not gonna. It's really difficult sometimes for me because I have so much contempt for these people. I'm going to take this clap and put it over my microphone so I don't forget to turn the volume on when I come back.
When I was trying to pull this talk together, not only will I sort of get a little philosophical about the impacts and the like and try to put things in context, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are these radiation experts that get trotted out in events like this, or that get to participate in various activities and analysis to make pronouncements about is something safe or not safe. And if you look, you'll see organizations that are often represented. The ICRP, International Commission on Radiological Protection, a premier organization. You'll see UNSCEAR and ERPA. So UNSCEAR is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. ERPA, the International Radiation Protection Association. The IAEA and some of its folks, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Our own US NCRP. And then there are a number of other organizations. So there's PAHO, there's the Health Physics Society, there's World Health Organization. All of these will bring in, as necessary, experts to speak to you on issues related to radiation protection, radiation safety, and impacts. But if you go a little deeper and you start looking at these organizations, the ICRP, for example, very well known. It's been operating nearly 100 years, not quite. Main commission, 10 people. It's got 5 standing committees. So it's 100-ish folks. I lead one of the 5 committees. If you look at the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation that looked at the effects from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from other areas, and that has about 30, roughly, countries that are represented in that group. If you start teasing through these pictures, you're going to see the same people on every one of those organizations. So the same people from ICRP are on UNSCEAR, they're in ERPA. If you look at the NCRP, again, the US organization that advises the country on radiation protection issues, it's 100 people. a lot of gray-haired 100 people, and most of them are part of UNSCEAR, are part of IRPA, are part of ICRP, participate in IAEA. So the result, or the real world, is that there's not that many folks that really do radiation safety, radionuclide transport, dose calculations, all of this in the world. It's a pretty small club, and we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more, but Health Physics Society, ICRP, Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA, and so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us.
How did they all know to laugh on cue that time? The only pin she hasn't got, and we like to give it to her, is the ASSHOLE pin and MOSTER. So that you just pay off the journalists a few $1,000, they'll sell out everybody. That's their job, right? That's how they make money. Stabbing you in the back. At Conference of Parties 29, 6 more countries endorsed the declaration, bringing the total number of countries that formally support the tripling of nuclear capacity to 31 countries. And half of them have no way, zero possibility of doing it or funding it. And the other half hasn't made a single move in that direction. And what I mean by that is they don't have the supply chain, right, to produce the necessary components. They don't have the employees. It takes around 4 years to train an employee to work to build these sites on top of that. And the ones they got are all tied up and booked for the next 20, 30 years. It's a very long ordeal to build these facilities too. Now, what we're seeing now is typically around 14 years to build them. And they're going to be at least 2, if not 3 times over budget. So they're going to come in and tell you, $3 or $4 billion. And $3 or $4 billion, they won't even have the foundation finished. Financing the tripling of nuclear energy. Securing financing remains a significant challenge for the genocide industry known as nuclear. Due to high upfront cost, complex risk assessments, you don't have to worry about the journalists, they're cheap. And uncertainties surrounding the returns on investments. Uncertainties. Well, first off, it's going to take them 14 years to build it. So who wants to invest in something that's going to take you 14 years just to get it up and running? And when it's finally up and running, it's so far over budget, your investment is dwarfed. Because they had to get so much more money in order to make it work. Your investments are worthless for another 30 years. And that these facilities can only exist with government subsidies on top of that. So the idea of profit is so absurd. And they control your media, they control your universities, and key positions in your government and everywhere else by proxy. Because if you control the universities, you control the work pool, right? And because you've been doing it for almost 80 years, then only the players you want in positions of authority are ever going to get that job. And anybody accidentally, there's lots of lobbyists for the industry out there will get rid of them. And that's how they work. They don't leave anything to chance. They're very refined. And that's one of the key attributes of evil like that. Right? They know that the world ever wakes up and gets a little sniff of what's really going on, it's over for them. And so see the chicken necks? Look at this chicken neck right here. All with the shiny boots on. And you can take a picture no matter where you to of the nuclear industry, and this is what you're going to see every time. It'll look exactly like that. They're going to have pure luxury around them. They're going to come in by limousines to draw attention. They're going to show up at the hotels in limousines. They're going to have valets falling all over them. They're going to party hard. They're spectacles, really, right? to promote the industry's image, right? And when he's talking about going after the youths, because youths are easily impressionable, you should be terrified. The potential role of small modular reactors for an already sustainable development. Yeah, there's a potential for geothermal too. And probably much more so than it is for, after 80 years, there's no such thing as a small modular reactors. You really think they're going to crack that cookie and have it up and running in the next 30 years? You're delusional. There's so many regulatory hurdles they got to go through, and they can say they're going to cut regulatory hurdles, but you can't. Because if you have a blowout, that's going to doom the industry. If you have another meltdown that comes public, that's going to destroy the industry. This industry can't survive another nuclear meltdown. And it looks like they had one on January the 1st in Japan, in the Noto Peninsula, but they were able to suppress it. But when you look at the enormous damage, we covered it. We were so convinced that something happened at the Shika nuclear power plant, which was closed down, but had active fuel pools at the top of these buildings. And at one point, many times in the first few days, they were talking about having an earthquake in the basement of the reactor buildings. In the basement, an earthquake. Earthquakes don't happen in the basement of buildings. They happen in parts of countries, right? But major medias were coming out and reporting that, and that it was like a 6.4 on a 7 scale, which is the Shindu scale that Japan uses. But on the international scale, you're talking about like an 8.5. On the Richter scale, on the international scale, in the basement of a nuclear power plant. In fact, the town Shika, we still never got no pictures of it, almost a year later. The town Shika, almost everything, there was one picture or two pictures that came out where buildings were flat and the roads looked like this, right? The main streets looked like that. Like they were buckled and twisted and torn. Buildings were ripped to pieces, flattened. The country shook forever. There was a massive earthquake to suppress the true nature of the earthquake. It was a fault line that was 3,000 years old and became active. There was a 150-mile rip right through the Noto Peninsula, and that's 75 miles of the coastline lifted up 13 feet. And what that meant was there were 6 harbors that dried out, and they're dried out permanently because the harbors were shallow harbors, and it lifted up 13 feet. So now they have all this extra land and no harbor. And that fault line was 3,000 to 4,000 years old. It's hard to pin it down exactly. The last time it had an earthquake there, but they knew there was a rupture there a couple of millenniums ago, right? And it produced tsunamis. It produced liquefaction far away in one community that has nuclear reactors, and not too far from the nuclear reactors, was 68,000 homes were destroyed through liquefaction, where the ground became liquid from the violent shaking. The water became like quicksand and made the buildings unstable. This is symmetrical for a huge part of that coastline where there's other nuclear plants in the other south of it. They successfully covered up any damage, including Ground Zero, where there's a nuclear power plant. Fuel pool, and they didn't show any pictures. And the only pictures that they finally did show was the top of the buildings. Reporters were out in front. Here we are at Shika. And then they had the camera pointed up at the very top of these buildings. Didn't show you anything. And that coastline was part of the coastline. Their shoreline was part of the shoreline that was risen up over 13 feet. And far, far offshore, right from the coast inside, it lifted up 13 feet, and the coastline rose up 13 feet. Not just the coastline, right? It's not like a piece of string. Right? Everything moved up, coastline and communities. And the destruction was 1,500 landslides, thousands of significant aftershocks in a 3-week period. We covered it, and you can find those videos. That documentation was impressive. And they covered it up, significantly covered it up. But it's pretty realistic to think that they had an event there. Because of there was no footage came out of Sitka. The community itself, and the community was destroyed. It was 100. It was a 7 out of a 7 in the community on the Shindu intensity scale, which is based on 7. So you got to multiply everything by 1.428. So 7 times 1.428 is 10, equals 10, right? So a 7 is a 10 on the International Richter scale. And a 10 earthquake is... Let me explain to you, actually. We got in 2018, there was an earthquake in Japan. In Hokkaido. It was exact replica of what happened. But they hid it away. They called it a 6.6 earthquake. Yeah, it started out as a 6.6, but that was on the Japanese scale, so it was very deceptive. I'll show you some pictures. Here we go. All right. Here we are. So this is a landslide. So when you get up close on the landslide, you can see, it gives you some indication. Then the roads themselves, you can see that was emblematic of Shika and many other places on the Noto Peninsula in Japan. Okay, so what was unusual about that's the kind of footage you see in the media. It didn't get any prominence. This is what it looked like on the Noto Peninsula, by the way. So they said it was a 6.6. That's what the international media said, but they didn't tell you it was on the Japanese Shindu scale. So 6.7 on a maximum intensity of 7 on the Shindu scale is a 9 point something, right? But there was something, lo and behold, that started to make sense to me, was that I came across these pictures in hindsight, and I don't know why we didn't see it back then, but we didn't. But I managed to find it in hindsight. I was doing I'm going to do a story about. Just bear with me. So I've never seen. Have you ever seen the payloads on every side of the mountain come crashing down? Have you ever seen that before? I've never seen that before. I'm pretty sure. Man. Just here we go. That's not it. That one. Oh yeah, here we go. Aikido. La, la, la. Okay, I got it. So think about the damage. Think about that damage right there. You think about that damage. So there was a nuclear power plant. And how close the X, you see the X? Well, that's where the earthquake was too. So the X was right there, and right not that far away from it was the Tamari nuclear power plant. And so these models down here are based on the Shindu scale. But if it wasn't so bad, why couldn't we find any pictures of the plant? Why did they bury all this? And how bad was it? Because I've never seen an earthquake do that before. That dropped the payloads on all sides of the mountains. I've never seen that before. As far as you can see, the payloads on every side of the mountains were dropped. So this Taiwan does the same thing. Taiwan has horrific earthquakes also. Japan's the very last, and they just opened a new reactor, a reactor that's been closed for 13 years today, right? Small modular reactors offer a promising solution to provide reliable, low-carbon energy to remote and northern communities. So does geothermal. So does take 1,000 nuclear scientists and put them on a big fucking hamster wheel, and they're more efficient than geothermal. Just put like a drip in their arms, and give them adrenaline. So just let them run till they fucking die. That's all they're really good for. That's how they should be retired. Is put them on a big hamster wheel with a drip in their arm, with adrenaline and food, and they never need to stop. Right? Let them run till they friggin' drop. Small modular reactors offer a promising solution to provide reliable, low-carbon energy to remote northern community, but it doesn't even exist. There's no likelihood of it existing. These stories exist simply to lull complacent investors into putting their money into an industry that has no hope to come into fruition at all. They're not even trying to. They have no intentions. They don't have a team of engineers working on a design, which means they have no intentions, right? As you can imagine why they would censor me. They're trying to raise money. You got me out there kicking the shit out of them. So think about this statement: small modular reactor. This is a story from yesterday. Well, New Brunswick chose a small modular nuclear reactor. It's actually going to be, it's so small, it's bigger than Chernobyl and Fukushima reactors. It's actually going to be underground 124 feet and above ground a little more. So it's basically going to be 240 feet building with 120, 12-story of it underground. 12-story buildings underground and 12 stories above ground, say. Right? 240 feet. How are you going to fit that in the back of a pickup truck or a transport truck, rather? How can you call that modular when you're talking about a 24-story skyscraper? 24-story skyscraper. How can you quantify the assertion that that's a small modular reactor? How does that actually work? 10 stories up and 11 stories down. It's actually more than that. It's 240-something feet. It's 24 stories. 10 feet in a story, right? That's the Canada Boiling Water 300, the BWR 300 reactors. That we're going to put in Pickering or Darlington Nuclear Plant in Ontario, Canada. And that's New Brunswick doesn't have a design, so that's the only one they're going to have an option for. And there's no application into the regulatory agency for the design for the reactor. And that's the closest they got to coming to fruition, by the way, is that particular reactor, right? But that's not coming to fruition. It's going to be 124 feet underground, for goodness sakes. It's not going to be modular. Its design is already incomplete, and it's not going to be small. It's just the nuclear industry pays the journalists to keep saying these stories over and over and over. And the unsuspecting investors lose their life savings. 2 weeks later, they rinse and repeat. Yep, that's the world we live in. That's simply not acceptable, is it? We're not going to make it through there. We're not going to make it through there. What am I to here? That's me, my fault there. Hang on. Why is it when I want to do something it's so hard to do it? Alrighty. We're going to come in and close down the poll. We're going to come in and close down the poll. I stop fucking around. Here's the French Canadian. Oh, I'm not on the right window. Jeez. Is United Nations claim the small modular reactors are climate liberators an evil deception to promote disease factories? Somebody accidentally voted no? How is that even possible? That happens, I suppose. We got 26 votes. Thank you, everybody, for participating in that. That was awesome. And we got a new anti-nuclear song we're going to play tonight. Spice it up a bit. What have I got done wrong now? I'll get there. Bear with me. I see everybody tomorrow night. James is Lucid's latest song. See everybody tomorrow night. You have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Each drop a warning left unsaid. I got pretty good show lined up for tomorrow night. Tokyo streets collected stain. And I had a long day. I'm busted up. We'll catch everybody on the next show. You have a great night and a great day tomorrow. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. We'll see everybody on the next show. Fix this before I go away. Catch everybody on the next madness. Take care, folks. Vancouver knows, but none will say.
price we'll pay another day.